So, welcome everyone to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario's annual virtual conference of 2025, Reporting Disclosures and Ethical Responses to Elder Abuse. So, we're so pleased that everyone's able to join us today. We had over 300 people registered, so I know people will be sort of popping in and out during the presentation today. You can do that, and I'll go through some logistics in a minute. So I'm going to ask Marta Hayek, our CEO, to provide our land acknowledgement before we begin our proceedings today.
Thank you, Rianne. We acknowledge that we gather on a traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land, its waters, as protectors of its natural abundance throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land that remains their home to this day. May this relationship be one of peace and friendship based in honor and deep respect.
Thank you, Marta. Just to optimize people's experience today, I want to just go over a few logistics. Everyone's muted, microphones and cameras. The cameras will be off and microphones will be muted. We do encourage you, as all of our sessions, to make comments into the chat box. We do encourage dialogue amongst each other as well as the presenters. If you have a specific question that you have for the speakers as they present, please post that in the chat box so we don't lose your questions. Sometimes the chat box can get very busy and we sometimes may be missing that, and we don't want that to happen. We are recording today's presentation, so that will be posted on our website along with any of the links that are shared with our presenters after the conference is completed. And we will be sending out an evaluation link to individuals after the presentation. You'll get a pop-up box just asking for your feedback on today's session. And we know this is a live event, it's a public forum, so we do appreciate your privacy and confidentiality, and we do make a commitment to respect that. If you have a situation that may arise that you may be dealing with, please reach out to EAPO. We'd be more than happy to assist you. You can phone us or send an email, and we will follow up and provide some additional support. Whether that's a case consultation on a one-to-one basis, we will be able to provide you. So about our conference. So this conference is indicated in the title is about reporting and disclosures and how we deal with some of these situations that we come across. Often people hear about people being very hesitant about knowing what to do. Do I step forward? Should I say anything? Who do I report to? What will happen once I make a report? So we brought together some leaders to talk about what the response is and respond in regards to elder abuse response. Given their time frame, we can't invite everybody, so we've chosen 3 guests to speak with us today, and we will be doing follow-up sessions as well. We know reporting is, the number one hit that goes onto our website. Most people are really interested in knowing how to report, who to report to, and so given the request for this kind of information, this is why we're doing a second session around reporting, because we have done one in the past and we constantly are evolving. So that's why we've chosen to address this again. So our goal really is to make sure that you have a better understanding of the role of the authorities and the importance of our actions to report, to hold perpetrators accountable, and work towards creating a safer community that values and protects the dignity of older adults. I'm going to ask our CEO, Marta, to come back again to provide our opening remarks.
Thank you, Rianne, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our conference focused on reporting, disclosures, and ethical responses to elder abuse. A key priority area for our organization is building capacity, whether in community or among service professionals. We work diligently providing empowering educational forums or targeted multi-sectoral training to ensure that individuals who interact with older adults have a better understanding of elder abuse or what protective measures can be applied when supporting seniors at risk or actually experiencing abuse. As the seemingly unabating prevalence of cases continue, increase in both complexity and reach, our understanding of reporting obligations and processes, disclosure, and ethical responses are very much pressing topics on everyone's mind. Everyone has the right to live free from abuse, from violence, and we are honored to have very distinguished speakers joining us today to share their perspectives through an ethical lens, an investigative law enforcement one, to those of inspections and client services authorities in retirement homes and congregate living settings. For those of us working in this important space, supporting older populations, it is imperative that we not only acknowledge what is happening, but that we be well versed in the recourse available to us, leading to more desirable and positive outcomes in the quality of life of the fastest growing demographic in Canada. Forums such as this harness our collective knowledge and experiences, challenging us to look at how we might implement critical solutions to the problem going forward. That knowledge is a fundamental catalyst for social change, because the better informed we are, the more effectively we can tackle and mitigate the impacts of these ongoing trends of abuse. My name is Marta Hayek, and on behalf of the board and staff of Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you this morning. Without further delay, thank you for your commitment towards helping stop the abuse. I am pleased now to turn over the proceedings to our facilitator and our Director of Strategic Partnerships, Rayanne Rideout.
Thank you, Marta. So as Marta indicated, our goals are really, focused on educational impact, improve your knowledge and skills around response, to encourage your interaction and participation. And we know, we aren't in a person, but we do encourage you to have that interaction in terms of the chat box and the question box. So hopefully we can have dialogue with our presenters to answer some of your questions, and also to, hopefully to lead to some collaborations where we can enhance our response to seniors who are at risk of abuse. These are just a couple quotes in Marta's opening remarks around, harnessing our collective knowledge. We all have extensive knowledge and expertise or lived experiences that we can work together to create more solutions that we need, that are critical. And I know that our speakers will be talking about that, that there is a need. There's big gaps in terms of our services, that our systems that we need to address. So hopefully we can talk about that and work together to support our older adults as we move forward. Just a rundown of our conference agenda. So after our more opening remarks and introducing the speakers, we will start with our conversation around after the initial call to police response and partnerships. So that will be Martin Franssen, who will speak from 9:45 to 11. And then we'll have Joshua speaking at 11 o'clock on the ethical responses of living at risk and elder harm. And we'll have a little bit of a break. If we go over a little bit, it gives you time to go get a coffee and get something to eat. And then we'll come back and have the RHRA have their presentation around mandatory reporting and complaints to RHRA and managing harm and risk of older adults. So at any time that you do need to pop off, I know that everyone's busy, you can log off and log back in anytime that you would like during the presentation today. This is a lineup of our speakers today. I'm going to introduce each one as we go through. And we are so privileged, as Marta said, to have these speakers with us today. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Detective Martin Franssen. So Detective Franssen has been a police officer since 1999 and is the team lead of a new unit with the Durham Regional Police Services known as OASIS, the Older Adult Support and Investigation Services Unit. The unit mandate is focused upon the support of older adults and the investigation of matters brought to the police involving older adults. Martin has an extensive career, and I haven't written everything down, but I'll just some of the highlights that he has spent many years in investigation. His primary focus has been financial crimes, and he will talk about powers of attorney, crimes that I know that he has been addressed in his work. His portfolio has included the protection of vulnerable persons, the complex corporate fraud investigations, estate litigation, and mortgage fraud. He's been recognized he's received many awards for the work that he's done in this area. He's very dedicated, committed, and passionate. I know I'm working with him on many committees that he's very driven to ensure that seniors' rights are protected. He also instructs a postgraduate course at Durham in victimization of the elderly and victimization of men. And he's continues to do further education. He's a graduate of the Osgood Hall Law School. He is the chair of the LEAPS, which is a law enforcement agency partners protecting seniors. And he's also active on his spare time on the local Rotary Club. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Martin to come online and start his presentation with us today.
Thank you, Rand. I hope everybody can see that. Hello, everybody. I was just looking at some of the chat there. People from all over. This is awesome. Welcome to everybody. Hope we can spend some time here that you find of value. Along the way, I'm hoping that Rianne will monitor the chat. I tend not to notice that when I'm talking. So
just have to share your screen. Yeah.
I'm going to share it.
There we
go.
Perfect.
All
Thank
good?
You. Yep. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah. It's always interesting doing the online thing. I'm talking to the walls basically, and I realize people are out there, and it's great. But I tend to look at myself for a while. So you might notice here in my first slide, I like this particular one because you'll notice is on the left-hand side, there's all these holes of different colors, different perspectives. And that's what, believe it or not, is a great analogy when we're looking at the abuse of older adult issues. There are just so many issues, so many things that come into play that at the end of the day, the goal is ultimately the same thing, to support that individual, whomever they may be. But it takes a lot of awareness of the different legislations, laws, opportunities through community partnership, relationships, etc. And it cannot be done alone, but we're going to talk more about that as we go through. I will put that quick disclaimer up that I am talking as myself right now. I am no way representing law enforcement per se. I will bring experience into it, but in no particular representation of any particular law enforcement. Many of you hear the term elder abuse. And that was changed a few years ago by the WHO, and a lot of organizations have followed out of that. Without getting too detailed, one of the reasons, of course, is the word use of elder, particularly in Canada and countries of similar nature, have Indigenous groups, but also a few origins in the Middle East. An elder tends to have the same kind of bearing and importance, if you would, as it does in the Indigenous communities here in Canada. So it's out of respect for that. And as well, I personally find that when I throw that word out there, elder and senior, it often calls preconceived notions, which leads people to act in certain ways. And that can be challenging at times because sometimes in that action, if you would, reaction based on that title, they end up forgetting there's an individual involved. So the WHO actually defines the abuse of older persons. They use persons. I tend to use adult. You hear me interject either one. This is their definition, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. There is my personal concern here is this area in particular. And the reason for that, what concerns me here is the expectation of trust. Actually, to back up, that they're under their definition within a relationship. And what is that relationship? Is it caregiver? Is it loved one, spouse, family member, etc.? And then there's an expectation of trust, which is suggesting to me that a stranger cannot abuse an older adult, older person, which is not true. The key thing too, under the US or United Nations, they look at anybody of the age 60 and older under the category. So I don't know why I'm not advancing here. There we go. And under the WHO categories, they look at physical assault, sexual assault, psychological abuse, financial abuse, and neglect. So kind of keep those in the back of your mind as we talk through this, and we're going to break some of that down. In Canada, most recently back in 2023, 24, they completed a study and looked at the whole issue of trying to define, because we did not have a definition, a Canadian definition of elder abuse, abuse of older persons. And then they came up with this definition. You will notice it's longer, but there's that within a relationship situation again, and expectation of trust, which, as I said, it had, through its own definition, actually end up excluding parties who are known to abuse or have caused abuse to an older person. Strangers, like I said, contractors, etc. In Canada, we consider, generally speaking, 65 years and older as being an older person, older adult. And again, you will notice I'm not saying the word senior. Moving on, from a criminal perspective, and this is the world I work in, of course, and ultimately that is the laws of the country, you will notice under that definition, there's only certain areas, and I've used these arrows to try to indicate to you what actually the Criminal Code of Canada covers. So an act could very well be something under the Criminal Code. A word, not so. People choose bad words or inappropriate verbiage, but that doesn't make it a criminal offense. An attitude, no, definitely not. Appropriate action or lack of appropriate action, most definitely. That'll get into neglect and issues of similar nature, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then the risk, your lack of action, your lack of care, your lack of or neglect of that older person. Is that criminal? Very likely chance that it truly is. So we'll get into that. And again, this is a definition that was developed for the Government of Canada through research. It is a social created definition, if you would. But when we're talking about under that category, they look at injury of physical harm, psychological, emotional abuse, dismissed sense of identity, dignity, and self-worth, and then sexual abuse. Going back to the criminal code, though, well, my apologies, I jumped ahead. We're going to talk about some of these elements, because when it comes to the criminal code, you'll look at 2, the emotional abuse, and 3, diminished sense of identity, dignity, and self-worth. Those aren't tangible, and therefore they're not in the criminal code per se. But again, we're going to have a further conversation about that. And just let me know if there's a question that comes up, please. So the criminal code, again, I never like to assume, so I just want to quickly let you know that it's the federal law of the land, holds true across Canada on all 10 provinces and the 3 territories. And it is based on the principle, which is common throughout democratic societies, that that justice is blind. And you will always see the statute having a blindfold over the eyes and balance there. It is supposed to, the nature of our criminal laws are set up so that age, for example, vulnerability, for example, generally sex, and let me quantify age under the age of 18. There's special considerations there, but it's equal treatment across the board, regardless of those and other situations. And that's very, very important in a democratic society, so that everybody is equally protected. In the criminal code, when we look at physical assault, sexual assault, psychological, and commonly referred to for Canada, these are the 5 categories, you will find that we cover off all elements there. Again, except under 3, emotional abuse. I'll talk about it in a bit, and psychological, problematic, because it's not tangible. And then 5, neglect. The hands of a third party, the criminal code covers off, but not self-neglect. If you choose to live the way you choose, so be it. Yeah, we may have the opinion that living in that environment that you're in, hoarding, et cetera, may not be the best environment, but that's a personal opinion, which has no bearing in law per se. But we'll talk some more about that in a bit. So as you can see from my check marks, and let's see if I can keep it going. What happens in the criminal code is, I just showed you that we actually talk about when there's elements of the criminal code that cover those things: assault, sexual assault, financial abuse, and neglected third party. What happens with those other things, emotional, psychological abuse, what comes into play is once we are successful in the criminal court justice system in getting someone convicted, and at that point in time, these become what is known as aggravated circumstances. So the age of the individual, their degree of vulnerability is then brought into the courtroom. It'll probably be there already, but it's stressed through the actual process of determining what is the appropriate penalty for the conviction that has just been ruled by the court. But you must have that ruling from the court to technically bring this into play and have a bearing on the outcome, the penalty. So in Canada, believe it or not, many of you, especially our community partners who work in this area, probably work under one or more of these legislations. But in my world, these are just some of the many legislations that I have to become aware of, particularly to the province of Ontario. Apologize for that flag being in the wrong place. All these acts have a bearing, and believe it or not, in many cases, the multitude of these acts or a number of these acts actually determines what we can do as law enforcement. We are governed as law enforcement by the Criminal Code of Canada. We are governed provincially, requirements to support provincial legislation, but there's limited powers in some of these acts for law enforcement engagement. And that often can hinder our involvement. It can often cause us not be able to participate in what people are seeking to get accomplished. And at times, you may, if you approach a law enforcement officer with a certain situation or concern, and the response is, well, that's a civil matter. In fact, what they often are referring to is one or more of these particular acts. The challenge is for law enforcement is we're expected to so many. So I've listed right there 11 of them, unique to this world. In fact, the list is substantially longer. And it's really difficult for the average police officer who is going from dealing with day-to-day issues on the road, calls for service, and understanding each and every one of these. And that, of course, in our world, and in particular police service I'm with, what led to the creation of a specialty unit we call OASIS, has nothing to do with the desert. And it has everything to do with a focus on supporting the older adult and vulnerable person. Ultimately, is anybody the age of 18 or older, could be at any point in their life. Age is not the determining factor there. And specialized training for myself and my team members so that we fully understand not only these acts, but the criminal code and how that all works together in hopefully in harmony, and at times it doesn't work well. And then we're limited on exactly what we're able to do. But that doesn't mean we can't try. And it's that trying that's very, very important. And along the way, as you will hear me say often, it takes our community partners to help us along the way as well. You're an integral part of that, shall I say, equation. Whether you initiate the call for service, whether you're the one that is investigating alongside us, or you're the one that's where we no longer can, for example, be investigating, but maybe it falls under your domain. and your legislation and your mandate, etc., and allowing you to do what you do best. For those who didn't know, under the Police Service Act, which changed in 2019, many police people think that our role as police officers is to go out and arrest people. That's not our number one role. You will see the number one role for us preserving peace, which one could argue very well that the preservation of peace includes the protection of our most vulnerable people, our most older adults as well. But under that is preventing crime. I often call it stop the bleeding. I steal that from the medical world, and encouraging others to work in that area, and then assisting victims of crime. Thus, again, going back to my unit's acronym, older adult support. It's that assistance before we actually work and looking at laying of charges, etc., which we'll see that is much further down the list. So again, our law enforcement role is preserve the peace, but help people and prevent those crimes, but actually support them. Very, very important that people understand that, because many times, we get engaged, people are automatically thinking we're there for something terrible, a terrible situation, or we're there to arrest someone. That's not always the case. That truly is not always the case. And we are there to help. So impact of victimization can be extensive. Canada is not renowned for studying issues related to older adults, traditionally speaking. So I refer to a study out of the Adult Protection Services of Texas from 2016. They looked at the 5 categories, as previous shown, of abuse and its actual impact on the human, the individual, the victim. And they discovered out of those 5 different categories, the 2 key ones that most common was financial and psychological. And I would suggest to you that they're very much interrelated. The loss of your financial resources at 80 years old, that nest egg that you worked so hard to build up, that nest egg that helps you to ensure that you're co-paying on your medication, that you're able to pay your rent in the retirement home or wherever you choose to live, your ability to choose your food, buy food for that matter, et cetera, et cetera. And the loss of that impact psychologically, so it goes well beyond just the wallet, shall we say, or the balance in the bank account. Huge impact. And their study, their research, of which that I understand that research continued after 2016, the publication of the report, actually found that a direct link between the victimization financially or psychologically and death within 5 years, which I found an extremely important statistic. And when you look at it again, as I already indicated to you, the impact is quite extensive on the human being. From personal experience, I can tell you that I have found that actually 3 years or less. And in fact, in one particular case, the impact was so great that the individual there was some cognitive concerns, but nothing serious. And 5 months later, they were actually admitted to a mental health facility, of which they never recovered from. Most unfortunate. So that impact, that hidden impact, you can't see it. It's a psychological impact because it's all going on in here, combined with maybe some other cognitive concerns going on in life, pressures of life, etc. Huge impact on the individual. And I will suggest to you that in every situation, every abuse of an older adult situation, there's a psychological impact there. Whether it be what I often hear from older adults when I'm talking to them is, I was stupid because or I'm too trusting, or it's my family. I expected that, etc. And then internalize that, blaming themselves. And one should never blame themselves. But I find often that they do, that they will internalize it. They won't even report it in many cases. And then they wear that, and that wears them down, unfortunately. Okay. So it leads to a decline in overall health and well-being, often a decline in cognitive state, can lead to a loss of freedom of choice, especially when we're talking financial here. Could be the loss of their home. I've seen that. Whether they're caught up in a fraud scam or a financial scam, they've mortgaged themselves for whatever reason, believing what they believe, and then they can't afford the mortgage, etc. And then overall decrease in economic standing. And as we all know, our economic standing in life actually determines a lot of the other things, the freedom of choice, for example, choice of where I'm going to live, and can affect my overall health and well-being. So it's major impact. And like I said, ultimately through that study, a suggestion of 5 years, personal experience, again, I've seen it under 5 years when the victim has not received their money back. So emerging trends today as fraud, financial crimes, neglect, and assault, physical, sexual. They seem to be the big areas in the world of older adults. I'm going to break each one down, have comments. If you have any comments along the way, again, I'll rely on Brianne to talk. Let me know. But when it comes to fraud, a lot of people will categorize anything related to finances as fraud. And that's not necessarily true. Fraud involves one or more lies. Now, whether they're making you believe that it is the CRA on the telephone or it's your grandchild and you've got to rush out and transfer some money, it's the bank security department, all those components, whatever they are, the romance scam, they all involve at least a single lie, tend to start with a lie, and then involve a whole series of lies as the story gets thicker, more unique, and the desire to acquire your money. That's what it's all about, folks. And in this world, so commonly believed is that the perpetrators of fraud in Canada, of which unfortunately victimization in Canada is quite high and very, very common. You probably get those interesting emails, shall we say, text messages on a daily basis, and those telephone calls as well. By the way, the best way to protect yourself from fraud is stop answering your telephone. It's the easiest way. But all of them are intended to get your wallet, but they're not always overseas. Very often they can be someone in your own community, your neighborhood, next province over, whatever the case may be. But we always make that assumption it's someone calling from a foreign country. Some cases that is true. Other cases, it's right here, right next door. Top five, and again, that list depends on where you look, but and I tend to agree with the list I have before me, obviously, is the emergency grandparent scheme. It is still alive, folks. A lot of efforts went into trying to knock that down. It has, and back in June of 2023, it has kind of reinvented itself, which tends to happen with frauds, that they adjust as we become aware of that particular fraud, that incident, we become more savvy, and we more cautious, shall we say. They will revise their methods, their angles, if you would. So, for example, in the grandparent scam, they used to call early morning to catch you foggy you're thinking, because of course you were sleeping. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock was a common time. They're calling time of day today. And I've had it everything. So traditionally it's the grandparent. So grandma, how do they know your grandma? They don't, but they do hear you when you answer that phone. Your gender appears and your voice often gives away your age demographic. Grandma, grandpa, and then off they go, leading you to believe that it's grandchild. I've actually had seen it most recently where they're starting to actually pretend to be their children, their siblings, mom, dad, an angle. Emergency element to that. We're getting lots of calls, if you would. Organizations claiming to be the security department from your bank. How do they know your bank? They don't. But all of this starts with what's called phishing, PH, phishing. They're looking for information and often, so commonly, people give up information without even realizing it. They purport themselves to be from that particular organization. And what ends up happening is they suggest your debit card's being, and it's not yours, their debit card is being compromised, the one you hold, and give you instructions such as hang up and call the telephone number in the back. Problem is they don't disconnect from the line. And when you dial that number, the individual's still on the line. Now they're pretending to be someone whom they're not. Another big one, especially hitting those individuals living alone. If you did not realize, there's two principles in Canada that are very important with older adults. First and foremost, that they will, Canadian policy as well as the province of Ontario policy is to leave you and support you in your home for as long as possible. We want this society wants you to be comfortable in your own home, whatever apartment, house, whatever that is. And the second one is everybody of the age of 18 is cognitively aware, responsible to the third party to prove otherwise. So what happens in the financial schemes, and there's a number of them, we see home loans, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, equipment installations, such as hot water tanks, furnaces for $70,000, nests, thermostats, $7,000, et cetera, commonly referred to as nosy. Yes, they changed the laws back in June of 2024. Problems still exist, though, folks. Home improvements, going by your house, I noticed that there was a shingle moved or removed, and it's going to cost you X number of hundreds of dollars for me to go on the roof and fix that. I come down from the roof a few minutes later. Oh, sorry, but in reality, the damage is much greater than ever expected. Now you're going to have to pay me $10,000 for a new roof. And what they have actually done in some cases gone so far as they've removed shingles and then left. Once you pay them, never to return. So now your roof, your house is fully exposed to the elements. Investments, too good to be true. All you got to do is, go get $100,000. We're going to give you this 15%, 20%. I've seen as high as 42% return on your investment. We're going to pay your rent for a couple of months. Doesn't last for very long before they stop paying your rent in the case of apartments, or paying that a loan interest rate that you monthly payments, and it all dries up very, very quickly because, of course, they have no intention whatsoever to ever pay you back. They have no intention whatsoever to support you. Big one, though, folks, cryptocurrency. Bitcoin being the most commonly known. There's over 1,000 cryptocurrencies. And the easiest way to look at that is it's air, it's not tangible. So why are you investing in something that doesn't exist? Romance scams. One should always remember that love should not cost. Those who are married, you might disagree with me, but love ultimately at the end of the day should not be based upon how much money is in your wallet. Impersonations comes out of the bank security. I would mention that. Government agencies, CRA, for example, identity theft. We sometimes get older adults whose identity used to acquire a motor vehicle off the lot of a dealership, only for that vehicle to end up overseas. And then tech support, big one, because in the world of older adults, we seem to find people who are really right into computers, jump in full-fledged, and then, of course, individuals who still work with one of these. Which is most awesome, I personally think, but avoid computers altogether. And then, when you're online, that's so your opportunity to be exposed to Microsoft's scheme where pop-up says, it's Microsoft, there's a problem with the computer, call this number, and then you're just led to go down a garden path. Computer takeovers. Remember, if they get your computer and they get access to your computer, they're getting access to everything that's on your computer. It could very well be your bank accounts.
And there's just a question just going back. So in talking about investment scams, what would you recommend for seniors who get caught up in investment scams?
Okay, so first of all, in the investment world, insurance, investments, etc., and I recommend this for everybody, is come up with what's known as a oh God, I just lost trusted. I lost the terminology. It'll come to me in my
Contact.
Contact. Thank you, Rand. All those professionals have looked and will look for you to identify a third party in your life, someone who's not on a power of attorney document, your appointment on that, someone who's not in your last will and testament, that if there's something going on, you all of a sudden come forward and start asking for certain transactions to take place and a suggestion that you need these funds for whatever reason, that they can contact that individual and say, hey, is everything okay? Everything going well? So if you haven't connected with your financial advisor, whether it be whoever's holding your RSPs, for that matter, even your bank account, your mortgage, etc., I strongly suggest that you reach out to that professional because they should set you up with trusted contact, number one. Secondly, if you are caught up in a financial scheme, whatever that may be, investment scheme, first and foremost, reporting to police. Secondly, and hopefully you did this actually prior to, as part of your research, you went to the regulatory authority. So for example, everyone in Ontario who's involved in managing or facilitating mortgages has to be licensed. They are licensed through Financial Services of Ontario, FSRA, Regulatory Authority of Ontario. They're also licensed through a mortgage organization, which is a couple. Go on the website if you have that opportunity, or call them. And they will tell you whether the individual you're dealing with is truly licensed. And then, if they are licensed, what's the status of that license? You may find that they are licensed, but they're in suspension currently because of fraudulent activity. You may find that they were licensed, but the license has been revoked due to fraudulent activity, etc. It is a quick thing to do on all the websites. It holds true for any of the organizations that are regulatory or covered under regulation. May they be for retirement home, long-term care home, real estate agent, travel agents, by the way, as well, lawyers, paralegals, and investment people. FSRA, you go on their website, take a little to navigate, look in the category you want, insurance, investments, and put the individual's name in there, and they're going to get you that info. If it comes up blank, might be a problem, folks. That individual who's purporting to have that legal standing and able to represent and set you up for like a mortgage or a loan or advise you on the best investments to make doesn't have the legal standing. Therefore, there's your first clue. Don't be dealing with them. So always a good place to start. If you have been caught up into that scam or victimized through an investment, then it's important not only to report to police, but go back to the regulatory authority, to whomever have governance, and report it to them as well. Why? Because they work under provincial statutes, provincial laws, and in those statutes and laws, they have authorities to which they can impose. So fines, jail time, etc., through provincial statute process. And in the law enforcement world, we look at the criminality. We look at the nature of the event, fraud, for example, and allows us to go down and determine whether or not criminality is at play here. Sometimes you'll find that the regulatory authorities have an opportunity to deal with what they deal with because, which I was going to show in a bit here, was the whole world of the criminal code, balance of probability. When it comes to regulatory authorities, 51% in favor, whereas in the criminal code, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which most people already understand that. So hope that answers your question. So I brought up fraud, and there's a difference between fraud and financial crimes. And I tend to find today that most older adults who are abused when it comes to finances, exploitation, abuse, it's a financial crime situation. It's not necessarily a fraud. What's the difference? So a financial crime it's the aim is to get your money at the end of the day, or your assets, no different than a fraud. However, it doesn't necessarily involve a lie. But what it often does is facilitate it through the use of valid and legal documentations or processes. For example, I often see where you have a valid continuing power of attorney for property. Your intention in creating that document was so when you are no longer able to manage your property, you have appointed someone, technically known as your attorney, to represent you. What ends up happening is you produce that document, it becomes legal the moment you've produced it and signed it, witnessed it, etc. And your intent is down the road. However, what tends to happen is someone gets a hold of it, they're out there actually using it, making individuals believe that you are no longer capable. There's the fraud, the lie, and they're, shall we say, mismanaging your property for personal gains. Why you could very well be sitting at home, not even realizing this is going on. And I've seen title changes to property. I've seen accounts get pillaged, bank accounts, etc. And financial crimes, the big one with that one, it involves, like I said, a number of different things. Joint bank account, joint ownership, big one. I strongly recommend that unless you're in a marital relationship, that you don't have a bank account or joint bank account. There's other ways to protect your account. Unauthorized use of debit credit cards. All those often lead, and unfortunately most commonly lead to being perpetrated by family members and or loved ones. And it is so unfortunate. So again, Canadian stats aren't very strong, but I can tell you when it comes to abuse, physical abuse of older adults, Canadian stats show that 60% of the time it's a loved one. That is right in line with out of the US as well. In Canada, there is no statistic per se, other than suggestion of the figure of 87. I will tell you from personal experience, it's 95% of the time it's family, loved one. And when I look to statistics out of the US as a comparative, the one I found as recent as 2024 says 90% of the time financial abuse is at the hands of a loved one, a close family member. And again, that's a financial crime, different than a fraud. And then at the end of the day, the aim is exactly the same, getting your money. When it comes to neglect, is another category. As I mentioned, it's common. Self-neglect, technically not an issue for law enforcement. What does that mean, though? Well, some people choose to live in places that maybe you and I wouldn't. Cleanliness is not at the top of the level or scale. There could be a variety of reasons for that, and that is personal to them. They're comfortable with what they are. Maybe sometimes they're not able to realize what the risks they're creating. But remember what I said, in Canada, everyone over the age of 18 is considered to be a capable mind. It's the responsibility of a third party to prove otherwise. So from a law enforcement perspective, how do we get engaged? Well, we're often taught, there's a concern. So that leads to what's known as a check in the well-being. And from that, we unfortunately often have a limited responsibility, and we can often refer that situation to our community partners and work with them to see if we can support that individual and help them navigate a safer environment, or one that is ultimately going to make it not only healthier for them, but also facilitate their ability to remain in their home that much longer. Well, the big one with neglect in the law enforcement world is the third-party neglect. So from a private residence perspective, that could be family, that someone's moved in with you, and they make all these promises to support you, but then at the end of the day, they just move into your home, take it over, referred to as a household unit takeover. And at the end of the day, you're neglected. And we've literally seen in situations where Mrs. Smith owns the home, has owned the home for years, been in the family for 40, 50 years, lost a spouse, family member promises to come in to assist Mrs. Smith, and then we find them relegated to the couch, The individual who moved in is actually taking over their own bedroom and all of their elements of the home, and they're now living in that square box or that rectangle created around the couch, and that becomes their existence. Most unfortunate. That too can lead to what's called a check on the well-being. I will get on more on that in a moment. From a long-term care perspective and a retirement home, folks, there is mandatory reporting. You're going to learn more from the RHRA this afternoon. Third-party neglect, that can be physical neglect, failing to provide medication. For example, leaving an individual in an incognito, spoiled incognito for hours on end, etc. They often learn, those situations are considered mandatory reporting to the regulatory authority. And by nature of that, they are often reported to police, but they're not considered criminal. They're more procedural and employee-based, if you would. So from a police department perspective, we will look at them, but most likely there won't be much in our case. But what we do get into from the leads for investigations are locked out of retirement homes, for example. Someone's taken over the house, hut situation. Often these situations of neglect lead to someone tapping into their bank accounts, etc. We look into those. A big one for neglect, believe it or not, is non-payment of long-term care, where the individual has, for all intents and purposes, being brought to the long-term care home, may or may not be visited in the future, but the home is no longer being paid. That is, to me, a sure sign of neglect. It is also in the criminal code theft, because that individual has an income, and the fact that the home isn't, their debts are not being supported, i.e., the payment to the long-term care home, where'd their money go? Somebody's living off the avails of, and that is theft. So, sorry. When it comes to sexual assault,
Pardon? I'm gonna pop on because there was a question about long-term care, so I'm just gonna pop on. So there was just a question when who do you go to report the long-term care, and do you always have to go to court to kind of get an answer to that? And then we weren't able to get long-term care on today, but we will be doing that in the future. But I'm not sure, just based on your experience, I know you can report to the long-term care action line, but if there's issues around harassment or abuse, do individuals have to go to the court system?
Yeah, so some of that stuff is new legislation. We have the Fixing Long-Term Care Act of 2021. We brought into an organization from two elements of an organization. First was the inspections, which is very similar. The RHRA has inspections, so every home is expected to have certain things, everything from the kitchen, cleanliness, and everything in between. And then they have the enforcement and regulatory organization, as does the RHRA. So that organization is still in its infancy. It's still working on legislation to support them. But you can report through telephone. You can report online through the Ministry of Long-Term Care. Something that also happened when all that took place is that Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care separated and became the Ministry of Health, which is on the health, hospital, that kind of world, and then the Ministry of Long-Term Care. So it's a unique ministry. They're not crossing over anymore like they used to. And like I say, the organization is set up to do investigations, prosecutions. That is provincial legislation. They have provincial authority. And right now, they're still in their infancy, so they're still building that up. They've only been around for just over a year now. As part of that change, that law, that legislation. So reporting, telephone number, online to Ministry of Long-Term Care. Does it lead to court? Most likely not, folks. When you're reporting to long-term care, they will come in if whether or not it is an element of enforcement or an element of making sure they follow the rules. They decide which department looks at it. They have the ability to internally do administrative fines, for example, administrative penalties, etc. But that is all through process. And to be honest with you, I don't know of a situation where it leads to court. though that organization, along with the RHLRA, may work at times in, shall I say, collaboratively with police. And so a situation, let's say a older resident of a retirement home got locked out, and something most unfortunate, something came of that. The RHRA or the Ministry of Long-Term Care would do their investigation, all behind the circumstances related. They would look at policies, principles, staffing, et cetera, et cetera. Police would look at that, what led up to that death and what caused that death. So they're kind of like parallel investigations. We may end up both looking at the same type of thing, but we look at it from a different lens. And one may lead to a criminal charge. The other may lead to provincial offenses charges. We may find that at the end of the day, provincial offenses charges are laid, but there isn't enough to supply criminal charges, et cetera. So it all depends. We work very closely, but if you, as a caller to them, I believe you can call anonymously, by the way. You can report anonymously. Identify your concerns of procedures, practices, et cetera, all through either the reporter or telephone number. And that has to be posted in every home, by the way, if you're not sure where to find that. Physical assault, which is a big one. Statistically, as I said, 60% perpetrated by a loved one and family member. That is proven by reports, criminal reports. It does sometimes happen institutionally. What I'm finding institutionally, sometimes it's we get reports that it's staff member on the resident or patient, depending on what organization you're talking about. That is a mandatory reporting. That would be reported, must be reported to the regulatory authority, retirement home or long-term care. Because it's an assault, it must also be reported to police because it's considered a criminal activity. That is staff member upon resident. But what we're getting a lot of lately is resident on resident, which can be very problematic, especially when you're looking at long-term care. A lot of people make that assumption that long-term care, to be a resident of long-term care, you have a cognitive impairment. That is not true, folks. If you did not know, be a resident of long-term care means that you have a need for care support 24/7. It may be due to cognitive concerns, but it could be for a number of other factors, and it can be anyone over the age of 18. And what we're getting is we're getting assaults occurring between resident on resident can lead to some very serious injuries. And just aside for you, 2026 to 2024, 32 homicides in long-term care. Last one perpetrated in town of Whitby, 18th of January, 2024. The majority of those all involved a push where the victim of that homicide passed days after the event, not immediately. So it's very, very concerning. And we've literally had people broken arms, damage to the head, which not always tangible, easy to see. Impact is huge, especially if there's already cognitive decline. All must be reported. But so often we get it's written up to, oh, well, I hear they have dementia. You can't have dementia. You can have a form of dementia. But we make up excuses for that behavior. Always remember bad behavior. Okay. Cognitive impairment is not an excuse for bad behavior. And something like that, an assault is an assault. It needs to report to police. It'll be the judicial system to find out what gets done through that. Which I'll explain further. Hopefully time works in my favor. I realize it's getting tighter, but institutionalized, big problem. Resident on resident is growing. Did you
Can I
have
just
another?
ask a question? There was a question around that actually, around policing, the training of policing with dementia and behaviors, and what would happen to a person with dementia if the police were called. So I know that I wanted to save time because there are some other questions, but I'll ask you to sort of briefly comment on that. But I also want to make a caveat that we are hosting an event in May, on May 11th, I believe, and that we are looking at the issue around dementia and domestic violence. And we will be talking about that because it's, as Martin will just comment, I'm sure it is unfortunately a growing issue that we need to be addressing. So Martin?
Yes, thank you. Again, realizing time is tight, but it's a growing concern. And so often I hear it's a person's got dementia, and I respond to you saying, how long's a piece of string? Because a cognitive impairment comes in different forms, and dementia is an umbrella term of over 100 different diseases. And it is not an excuse for bad behavior, by the way. And your grandmother in an institutional environment should never be exposed to any form of physical violence, um, just because their fellow resident might have a cognitive concern. So if there's evidence of a criminal offense, we are required to action. Police are not empowered to disregard evidence of a criminal offense, i.e., not to do anything, because we believe that the perpetrator has a cognitive impairment. That gets into IPV as well, very much so. In the world of IPV, in all other areas the police operate, we do have a degree of determining whether or not it's worthy, shall we say. We have some discretion. We have no discretion in IPV. Going back to what I said previously, then, is if there's evidence of criminal offense, we must, in IPV, intimate partner violence situations, okay, current or past history, we must action. That means that we could very well be charging an 85-year-old for assaulting their partner at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. And as much as the partner might say that my spouse has a form of dementia, it's irrelevant, unfortunately, in the process. Then it becomes very complicated for police. So in answer to the first part there, what are we doing about dementia? Well, we work closely with our friends at Alzheimer's Society of Ontario. If you haven't worked with them, I encourage you to do so. Reach out to your local Alzheimer's Society. They cover all elements of dementia, not just Alzheimer's. They're a great resource to work with. It's on an ever increasing scale right now, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, it becomes extremely problematic because we look at an individual, they're 80 some odd years old, they're in a relationship for 40, 50 years, let's say. Now they've just assaulted their partner. Arresting them, do they really understand their arrest? Do they understand that process? Do they understand their rights? Can they actually go into a contract for release, which is going to keep them restricted from their partner? They won't be able to return home. Oh, that's another problem then. Where are they going to live? In Ontario, there's a number of shelters focusing on women. There's only about one shelter in all of Ontario focusing on men, and it's full. So now what do we do? Very, very problematic. It is something that police have been behind on. We are slowly catching up. We're working with the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario, for example. We are trying to learn that, the training, trying to understand and realize it. But at the end of the day, you must remember that when it's intimate partner violence, we have no choice. Evidence must charge. And in other situations, we cannot, shall we say, chalk up the situation to the fact that Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones has dementia. Bad behavior is not excused by having a cognitive impairment. So, and in the institutional world, there's two regulatory authorities that come into play under these acts. They don't necessarily impact us, although there is situations that occur in the institutions that they must report to us. Some of the problem in our world is misunderstanding in the police world. For years, like a retirement home and long-term care home, previously known as nursing homes, they've been around for a long time. But there was never that interaction with law enforcement like there is today. The changing demographics of today are making the awareness increase greatly. The number of homes, both retirement and long-term care, is going up exponentially. I know in my region there's 4 under construction. We've already got 21. That means, the number of incidents are going to go up. The acts that have come out most recently as 2021, are now causing organizations to take a look. They cannot keep it in-house, shall we say. They must take care. So that is causing reporting increase on police. That is causing us to respond accordingly. And I can say in the latest version of the Police Services Act of 2019, there is a requirement for officers to have specialized training in this world. And we're currently working on making that training appropriate. And in doing so, they must understand such things as dementia and its various forms, as well as a whole bunch of other things. So quickly going into assaults, common caregiver, I already mentioned that. Others can be anybody that's in your home, and then IPV, growing big problem in that. And so the law enforcement, I realize I'm getting close to my time here. The criminal code has, and it bases upon the law enforcement oh, I'm sorry, that's a typo. To lay a charge requires that we have a reasonable expectation of successful prosecution. Reasonable expectation. That again goes back to my ability to actually consider the circumstances and determine whether or not I have that reasonable issue. I don't have that choice in IPV. Criminal code, for a conviction to occur, it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So we lose our discretion in IPV. In the criminal code world, that reasonable doubt, everybody's seen the scales of justice. So remember that we, as law enforcement officers, do not have the independent ability to disregard evidence of a criminal offense. The evidence is there, we must collect it. We may, from that process, come to the conclusion we don't have a reasonable expectation of successful prosecution and therefore not charge. That we have a choice on, but we do not have a choice to disregard the evidence as it is. So at times, if you call us, we will turn to you to assist us, let's say, in collection of that evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're, at the end of the day, we're going to end up laying a charge. So, but do keep in mind 32 homicides in 8-year period. IPV, I quickly put that up. I mentioned that already. So if we're dealing with an individual in an intimate partner violence situation, we lead to a charge, and that charge causes mandatory, no choice. That will automatically trigger a requirement to engage other elements, i.e., as part of the circumstances, they're going to have to enter into, for all intents and purposes, a contract. It's not a contract, it's a release process where they make certain agreements. It will include non-association with the individual to whom they've assaulted, accusations of assault. That will ultimately, they cohabitate, mean that they can't return to home, for example. So now we, in the law enforcement world, have a huge problem. We don't have shelters, primarily for men. Sometimes they're available for women. When I mean that is the homes are there, but they may not have space. And then you have to bring in the whole medical and healthcare. Is it possible that an older adult with a cane or a walker is being charged for assaulting another? Well, yeah, it is. So are there facilities, physical facilities to which they're processed through? Are they accessible facilities? Does the individual understand what's actually happening in that whole process? A lot of issues, many of them new to, as I said, to law enforcement, to which we're just trying to navigate and realize and come to a consensus on how best to do it. But at the end of the day, what we have realized is that each circumstance is unique upon itself. Unlike when you're dealing with someone, shall we say, that is cognitively aware or tend to be younger. So I was asked about the Mental Health Act. And again, I apologize, I'm going through this quickly, but there's so many things we wanted to cover. The Mental Health Act is mental health, dementia, acquired brain injury, they're not a mental health issue. Many will say that they are, but under the act and the governance of that act, they're not considered mental health. They affect one's mental capacity, which ultimately affects their health overall. But in the act, a form of dementia, ABI, acquired brain injury, etc., is not a mental health issue. What does that mean at the end of the day? Well, at times we have faced with a situation, with an older adult. Let's say they're not caring for themselves appropriately, according to our opinion, which is very important. So we check the well-being's created. In we go. We take a look at their home. I'll talk again more of that in a moment. And it's a mess. There's rats running around. You can't use the kitchen sink. You can't use the toilets. Forget the shower or anything else. There's a very slim, limited access between point A and point B in the home. Neighbors complaining about rats, mice, the smell, etc., etc. We go in, check on the individual, and as long as they present to us that they realize what they're doing, their situation is, they're caring for themselves, they appear to be happy, healthy, there's very little we can do. Very, very little. From a hoarding perspective, we do have the opportunity to reach out to local bylaw and fire prevention to see if they have any concerns. Fire trap, for example, but that's another community partner to which we rely on to do something else. So at times you might find that we've come in, done a check, engage with that individual, and then we leave. Knowing that their situation is what it is, knowing that, in my opinion, I may not wish to live like that, but they do choose to live that way, so not a lot we can do about it. At other times when we have concerns with mental health, which is a growing issue of all ages, well, an individual can go and before a justice of peace or a medical doctor and get what's called a Form 2. So you could go forward to a medical doctor or JP and express to them concerns in relation to the mental health state of an individual, whomever that individual is. As long as you present to them information that suggests that there is a definite concern, which I'll get into in a moment, regarding their overall mental health. So they're either a threat to someone else, may it be a physical threat, that they're assaulting other people, for example, or a threat to themselves. And that can be a self-harm type situation, suicide attempts. Sometimes as we try to think of it, extends to the failure to feed oneself, take medication and stuff. It's kind of tough, but if a justice of peace or a medical doctor issues a Form 2, that is an order for police where we must go and apprehend the individual. It's not an arrest, it's an apprehension. And in that legislation, what it requires us to do is upon apprehension, we must then take them to the closest facility, medical facility, hospital, that is designed to deal with people with mental health concerns. So we can't take them to the corner clinic. We have to drive to the hospital. And the hospital has to have a specialty unit within itself that where the individual could be housed for a period of time, maximum 72 hours. We get this order, we go, we pick up the individual, Mrs. Smith, and when we do that, we take them to the hospital because we must take them right away forthwith. And then we present them to the attending ER physician. It is up to that ER physician then to determine whether there are grounds at that moment to support a continued apprehension leading to, for all intents and purposes, an unwanted admission, unwanted on the part of the individual, because they're about to take away civil liberties. They're about to take that individual and cause them to live on their in this facility for the period of maximum 72 hours initially. Once they start their process, so if the doctor agrees that is valid, then the doctor will then issue Form 1, and the person goes into the medical world. Again, starts with 42 hours. If that original assessment, medical assessment, sees a need to go longer, they have a process in place in the healthcare world that can extend that 10 days, 30 days, etc. So often is the case that we will present someone to the ER physician based on our concerns. And it sometimes happens in a self-neglect situation. Mrs. Smith is not taking her medication. Mrs. Smith, there's suggestions of cognitive impairment. She continues to leave her home, stepping out into traffic. She doesn't dress appropriately for the weather, et cetera, et cetera. And you look back and say that kind of a threat to themselves. Often is the case, though, that again, the ER doctor, the attending physician, must, at the moment, be very concerned themselves and believe that this individual meets one of these criteria. And that's a high bar. So it's not uncommon that we will deal with an older adult, realize that just, shall I say, a last resort, we apprehend them. It's not an arrest. Apprehend them, take them to the hospital, hoping that the hospital system will be able to help and provide a degree of care for them. And then the attending physician in the ER goes, nope, doesn't fall into this. Just because they got dementia does not mean that they are harm to themselves or another person. Therefore, we are not going to keep them. And then that individual goes right back to wherever environment they had. It's really problematic. And what I've also seen is that sometimes people will go get a Form 2 before a doctor as a way to circumvent the system. And what I mean by that is through process, their health at home, the individual, the older adult, has been determined that the requirement for them to get 24/7 care, thus they need to go into the long-term care on that list. Yes, those lists are long. We're seeing a degradation of their cognitive concerns or their physical, whatever the case may be. So let's go get a Form 2 from the doctor and then hope that by putting in the hospital can't discharge them until there's a safety plan. Therefore, the hospital's will be able to speed up the process and put them into long-term care. Well, folks, doesn't work that way. It's good E for effort. However, what you end up doing is the individual just becomes in the middle of a ping pong game, being tossed around. Many times you are not going to speed up the process. It's a waste of resources in many, many cases. And it's unfortunate, but the long-term care list is the long-term care list. Is not going to get any better. It is going to get worse. And I can't overstress that living with a form of dementia does not mean a mental health concern under the Mental Health Act, which we as law enforcement have the ability to enact, but it's very, very restrictive. It's the moment. So if the other thing that can happen with a police officer is we can attend a home, we can interact with an individual, and if as an individual we determine that they fall within one of those elements that I've listed here, harm to self, harm to others, then we can apprehend, take to the emergency, and hope that the doctor then forms. In many cases, though, doesn't happen. It's all based on the moment. So what's a wellness check? Often in my business is called check of well-being, depending on where you are, who you talk to. There's a concern for the health or well-being of an individual overall. So you haven't seen Mr. Smith, my neighbor, in a month. He's always out and about. Winter was tough, but we haven't even seen him come out with the garbage or anything. I'm concerned about him. I looked through the window, checked the doors, everything's in, but he's not answering. That's called a wellness check. You just completed one yourself, but you didn't get the answer because you haven't been able to connect with. So you reach out to law enforcement and you ask for a wellness check. You do that by calling your local police service, not 911 unless you have justification to support that emergency. You call up, say, I'm concerned about whomever, my neighbor, my parent, I'm in a different city, a different town, whatever the case may be. I ask that officers go attend. Very important that you understand that it must be made in person, and an in-person contact must be made. We can't do it through Zoom. We can't call them up. What that means is officers, there will always be two, will show up. They will knock on the door. If we have reason to believe there's a problem inside and the individual can't open the door, i.e. we have to know they're inside, we may see them laying on the floor, for example, and that's happened. Falls have occurred, individual can't get up, and that has a whole gamut of concerns that come out of that. We may have to break the door down, force entry. Look for keys as quickly as we can, but may have to. Always two officers. And then, like I said, we must make contact. So we knock on the door, somebody presents himself to the door, but that's not the person that was presented to us, the individual to whom someone is really concerned about. We must see that individual. We must engage with that individual. So the person standing at the door says, no, you can't come in. Meaningless. They have to step out of the way because, excuse me, they have to let us in. That is longstanding common law because we are required to ensure the safety of the individual to whom the call for service was originated for. So if it's your aunt or grandmother, whatever the case may be, we must make contact with them and we must assess that situation based on that contact. Are they in a safe environment? Is there something going on? Is there more to this, etc.? So a lot of times situations will just start with that contact. Police report will be generated out of that, or better be at least, and possibly from that, other investigative actions may take place. Or from that, we may reach out to a community partner and say, hey, we've interacted with Mr. Smith, who's living in this home. They're on their own. They seem to have a propensity to falling. Looks like they could do with some community support. Can you engage with them? And can you help them in any way that your organization is able to do? Such an important element. I cannot always stress this, folks. This is not, at that point in time, it's not a law enforcement responsibility, but it is a responsibility ultimately when you look at it, because we are responsible for the making sure the individual is safe. Part of that is engaging you, and that's what your value, can never be downgraded. It's so important that you work closely with your police services and provide those support to that individual, have that ability to communicate. As I said, the personal interaction must occur. The other thing I want to talk about is referral to public guardian, because so many people don't realize in Canada, we have no adult protection laws. Equally, there's no adult protection laws in the province of Ontario. There's protection laws, as we all know, CES is designed for children, traditionally under the age of 18, but can go high as 21. But when you get over that age, again, realizing the policy is that everybody is a capable mind unless proven otherwise by a third party. What happens if I have a situation where there is no family? There is nobody else out there, and Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones seems to be struggling in their own environment, and someone's coming along. A stranger seems to be coming along and seeing them more often. I believe that they're taking them to the bank, accessing the debit card, credit card, accessing their funds, relegating them to the corner of their home, whatever. Who do I call? Well, police, definitely. But you could also do a referral to the public guardian trustee. There is no limit on who can refer to the public guardian and trustee. That office, element of the Government of Ontario, under the Ministry of Attorney General, has a multitude of responsibilities, but one is protecting individuals 18 and over. They're considered a last resort. So if there's a family member out there who's prepared to assist that older adult in managing their property, et cetera, that's deferred to them. This is a situation where there seems to be nobody else, or could be a situation where that family member is actually the perpetrator of the crime against the older adult. They're the ones, through the use of their power of attorney document, is actually ripping off the older adult. You can do a referral. How many referrals? Everybody has a different lens. So we could do a referral from police. There could be a referral from the healthcare world. There could be a referral from a community partner. It could be a referral from a next door neighbor. Telephone number or email address. Always two things you must keep in mind. Again, with the premise that they are the last resort. There has to be suggestion or evidence of cognitive impairment. Suggestion, don't say dementia, is not going to be good enough. What is the actual concerns around that perceived impairment? If they've actually gone through a capacity assessment, then it's evidence of cognitive impairment. And then the risk factor. And the risk can be health or the risk can be financial. management of property, because that's the two areas. You could also go to the Superior Court of Justice if you so wish, and you could seek guardianship. And they look at guardianship in two areas, personal care and management of property. Mrs. Smith living alone, she seems to be caring for herself, but trying to balance that bank account, make sure that her bills are paid before there's problems for lack of payment. She needs assistance in managing her property, and you're in a position to assist them. You would have to go through the Superior Court of Justice to seek guardian. It requires documentary evidence of cognitive impairment, and such as a report of a certified capacity assessment. It does not accept doctor's notes, as doctors, the average medical doctor is not qualified to do anything other than provide an opinion, and the opinion is limited to health care. And that holds true, by the way, for triggering power attorney documents. If you're in a position where the power attorney document actually says, when I am no longer capable of managing my property, for example, as attested to by a duly licensed medical practitioner in the province of Ontario, then you can use that, because you just, the grantor of that power attorney gave permission. But if it talks in generalities, like when I am no longer capable in accordance with Substitute Decisions Act, that's inferring that you have to go through a capacity assessment. The grantor has to go through a capacity assessment by a certified capacity assessor. Another conversation gets quite convoluted. But very, very important that you understand that. And the concerns then for you as the individual seeking guardianship of another adult, always remember they're an adult. Civil liberties is very important here, and the court does not take that lightly. It can be a very challenging process to navigate. It can be extremely expensive, upwards, I hear, of $10,000 to $20,000. It becomes a bit of a battle, not only the paperwork, the navigational wise, period of time from start to finish, etc. And ultimately leads to you having to accept fiduciary responsibilities that can hold you accountable both criminally and civilly. But it is an avenue that's available to you. And it's a very important avenue that you as an individual or public guardian trustee, for example, or someone else could actually go through. So there's opportunities there. Things are changing, folks. And so too must law enforcement. It's been a challenge. I mentioned that the Act, Police Services Act, has been modified in that it is requiring specialized training for officers who are dealing and investigating matters related to older adults. We are trying to educate officers to understand the complexities of the issues, but at the same time, there's a lot of complexities. And as at the beginning there, I listed off a whole bunch of acts and legislation, provincial, in addition to the criminal code and all those things, other federal statutes that we are required to do, and in addition to all the other things, and fully try to understand the nuances and complications. It's challenging. Things are not going to happen overnight. They are happening, but they're not going to continue happening. So in that process, society is very important to as well. You as a community partner, you as a member of community, if you see something that's not right, then guess what? There's a very good chance it's not right. Don't be afraid to report. I'll give you a quick example. Situation most recently, individual found someone outside a particular home. They had been knocked out. They didn't know that. Oh, dark, whatever, in the middle of winter. They called, they remained for ambulance, and the individual was saved. Had that individual not taken the time to do so, who knows what could have happened? Most likely the most unfortunate. You involved. You have a neighbor, you haven't seen him in days. You're not being nosy. You're being protective. You're assisting them. You're helping them. Call for a check in their well-being. It gives us a great opportunity to interact with members of our community. Every officer likes to do that. If it comes out positive, most excellent. If there's other issues that come out of that, you might have just saved someone's life. And you won't know that if you don't take the time to report. So I encourage you very strongly. It's a collaborative effort. It is law enforcement, community partners, and you that are going to protect our older adults as we go through this huge change in Canada, where the demographics anticipated by 2040, 29% of the population of Canada will be of the age of 65 and older. I know that was fast. I hope that wasn't too fast, Rayanne.
That was great. Thank you so much, Martin, for such an in-depth. There's so much to cover in such a short period of time, but we do have a couple minutes for some questions. So the first one was just, how would you advise clients to report elder abuse when their first step was to contact the police, but the police have refused to take action? Is there a hierarchy of people that they would go to in the police force, or how do people approach that when they feel that they're not getting any response from police?
Yeah, and I feel for you when that happens, folks. I mean that most seriously. And I have to say, until I started working in this area back in 2014, I probably would also come up with that, oh, it's civil, without truly understanding. It is such a complex world that we're in. So, and officers, the training's coming. It's slow. So at times we make these assessments. Individuals make these assessments without fully understanding the complexities of stuff. So if an officer responds to any call for service and you're not happy with it, start with going back to their supervisor. So on the road, there's the road officers, then there is the uniform supervisors, which will be a sergeant. If you're engaging, you're out there, you can see their pants. Police constables, it's a red line on their pant. OPP, it's blue, dark blue. And the supervisor is black. So that there's a clue. And their cars will generally say supervisor on them. You can always attend the police station or call and ask to speak to the supervisor, the staff sergeant on scene. If their police service, such as the one I work with, has a specialty unit, feel free to call us and express your concerns, because I will look at the call, as I know my partners in other police services will do, because we have more knowledge and experience in this particular field than the officer that's out there dealing with all the other things they have to deal with. And understanding from a different view, we may all of a sudden be able to do some action. No promises there, but it is a very complicated world. And I ask for your patience. But if they do tell you that it is not police, ask for an explanation as to why. And if you're not comfortable with that explanation, then go up.
Great, thank you, Martin. The other question was around powers of attorney, and I know that we could do a whole session on powers of attorney because of the misuse of that we see. But someone was just asking, would you recommend an individual taking a copy of their POA documents for property to their bank or financial institution as a proactive measure, so they have information on that?
Okay, so the first and foremost, remember the power of attorney documents. There are three. A lot of people don't realize that in the province of Ontario. Very, very commonly misused is the continued power of attorney for property. And one of the biggest problems in the misuse is the ability that is actually handed out. I always recommend that remain with the individual. The grantor of the document remains with them. If at a stage in your life where you see as the grantor, you're concerned and making sure you want to manage your affairs appropriately, you can take that document to the financial institution. It has to be original copy, by the way, showing the original signatures. They will then take record of it and they will put that on their record. But the key thing, what you want to do is make sure you tell them this is not active at this moment. It's a legal bearer instrument, legal document, but I'm presenting it to you not for the purposes of having the person I appointed, the attorney, taking action on my account. I just want you to have that on file until the time comes. You want to be very careful of that because if that message is not received appropriately, that individual could very well the next day be accessing your bank account and start doing things. So my personal recommendation to people when it comes to power of attorney, just like with last will and testament, if you're able to keep it in your own possession.
Great, thank you. And I'm just looking at another question, the comment box. So when wellness checks are made when required by a team member, if a PSW has reported a client not home for a visit, not admitted to hospital, and family are not aware of the client's whereabouts, so understanding privacy and how busy police are in the community, oftentimes there's not a follow-up or availability on an update. What's the best practice for these kind of circumstances? So person might be missing. I'm not sure if that's what the case is, if the person's wandering about. I guess it would be circumstantial depending on the actual client, I would suspect. Wellness
Okay, so
check.
sorry, Rand. When you call us, we will ask you some basic tombstone information. I know that's a term nobody wants to use anymore. We're going to ask for basic information. So who are you calling about? What's the address? What's their name, first name, uh, and last name for sure. We'll ask you for a date of birth, and otherwise their age. That just helps us understand who we are. Of course, we're going to run that through the computer system to see if there's a history of them. And it often on these checks of well-being, there is a history with them. When it comes to you become a third party at that point in time. So the Privacy Act does not permit us to go back and give you the intricacies of our interaction with that individual. It will permit us, as the caller, the concerned neighbor, the concerned family member, we can call you up and say everything. We went, we attended, we found everything to be okay. That's all we can tell you. I can't tell you beyond that because of the privacy rules. We can tell you that we found a individual and they're currently at the hospital. We can tell you that too. But again, we can't tell you why they're at the hospital. We can't tell you the details. You would then have to go to the healthcare system, of course, and they will determine whether or not they have that conversation. So we are limited in some areas. We're allowed to have that conversation with you. But please, if you have a situation, you're concerned with someone and the well-being of that person, they're on the opposite side of the door and you're knocking and you've been knocking, you've come the last 3 days looking for them and you can't find them. I've gone on calls where the person's driven in the driveway and said they just came back from a long weekend, but didn't bother telling anybody. Okay, cool. No harm, no foul. At the end of the day, no harm, no foul. But we've also had situations where we've shown up, we've had to break the door down using devices, and we have found the individual has been laying on the floor for the last 72 hours. And if you're not familiar with, that's where your ulcers, pressure ulcers start happening within 45 minutes of being on the floor, etc. No food, defecation, etc. Who knows what's all going in the environment? And had you not taken that time to call, the worst case scenario would have come out of that. So I always tell people, if you go, should I? You just answered your question.
Great, thank you. I've two minutes, then we have to go to our next presenter. One question was around, and may refer to the Mental Health Act. So if an older adult has capacity issues and decides to stay with the abuser and they may be at harm, is that something that could be under the Mental Health Act to remove that person, or is it still their choice? And maybe this can get into the next presentation when we talk about ethical and moral values and substitute decision making, that kind of thing. But and just maybe a quick response, and I have one more last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, that was a difficult one. Again, for the mental health, you got to remember that at the moment that we're interacting, the police officers are interacting.
Oh, sorry, the person has capacity. I got that wrong. The person has capacity, but they stay with the abuser.
Yeah, and a
You can't
capacity.
force someone to stay there. So that'll be Joshua's conversation around ethical
If they
and moral
decide to stay with
balance.
And that influence is huge. They're afraid to be out on the street. That's their primary caregiver. And a part of that equation, I realize that now and then I have to go through what it is I'm going through. It's embarrassment. I don't want to admit the fact that my child is abusing me. I looked at as a failure upon myself. It's not by our lens, but it is by their lens. And that's all that really ultimately counts, because that's what's driving them. We can, suggest to them that there's better ways, there's places they can go. But at the end of the day, it remains with the individual.
Right, and we will talk about that in our next presentation. Lastly, in 30 seconds, would you, and I know you may not be able to speak to this, but do you have any suggestions on any changes to laws or legislation that you think would help improve the safety and support of seniors? Because in your presentation kind of alluded to some of the laws don't work, or sometimes they're complicated, maybe costly, like going to the court process.
Yeah, my big one is the Substitute Decisions Act has to change. It is designed and it was written back in the late 80s, came into play in 92. Society has changed. Family dynamics have changed, reality has changed, financial standing has changed. There's a lot of things in there that are suggestive of proper actions, fiduciary responsibilities for one of them. It says in there that you cannot commingle, which means take the bank account and put yourself on joint with your parent and all of a sudden manage their accounts because now you're commingling. But there's no teeth to it. There's no accountability. There's no penalties incurred. And there's nothing. There's no charges that can come out of that. And it doesn't give you clarity. Like I, as Joe Q citizen who's helping my grandmother, and I'm taking on the status of an attorney and a power attorney, continued power of attorney for property, should fully understand my fiduciary responsibilities. I read that book. It'll put me to sleep, first of all, but more importantly, the clarity is not there. And you walk away going, then when that happens, I will end up doing what I think is right at times, whether it's to my benefit or otherwise. And in that, because that clarity is not there for me, it's not there for the institutions either. So depending on what bank you're talking about, what community partner, everybody has a different interpretation of what that actually says or believes to be said. So the spirit of the legislation is lost in interpretation. And why? Because they never bothered to tell you exactly what that phrase means and what that impact of that action will have should it be found that you have failed to follow your responsibilities. Number one, and I'm fighting since 2016 to change that act, it needs to be updated and it needs teeth.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your insightful presentation. There's lots of great comments. We could maybe have a part 2 on this this session. So thank you again, Martin, for your insightful information. And if anybody has any other questions, please post it in the chat box. I can follow up with Martin and get you connected if that's the case, where we can find some other information for you. So thank you again, and lots of thumbs up for you. Thank you.